United Nations experts are concerned that Islamic State and Al-Qaeda extremist groups are spreading their influence, boasting gains in supporters and territory, and inflicting the greatest casualties in Africa, especially West Africa and Nigeria, where affiliates of both groups are growing capabilities in fundraising and weapons, including the use of drones. What does this mean for Nigeria's fight against insurgency? And is the arrival of the 6 A-29 Super Tucano aircraft a drop in the ocean? Here to speak on this is counterterrorism and organized crime specialist, David Otto. David, you're welcome to the show this morning.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right, thank you. Well, let's take the issue right away. Is this something that Nigeria should celebrate? Yeah, I mean, there's a whole load of investment in military equipment, going on, especially in the last 6 years. Now 6 new Tucano aircraft have just arrived. How much of this should we celebrate? What precisely are they expected to do, particularly at a time that bandits are able to shoot down, our aircraft, and thankfully, the pilot, between Zamfara and Kaduna was able to escape. So how much of this is good news? How much of it is concern?
Yes, that's a very good way of looking at it. Purchasing equipment for counterinsurgency, for patrolling the porous borders of Nigeria is something which is very important. But again, equipment don't really mean a lot if you don't add into it other features. So the A-29 Tucano aircraft, which is a combat jet, of course, this has been ordered since 2018, and the Nigerian government did order, actually, I think about 12 of them. So this is just the first 6 batch. So it's taken about 3 years for this to be delivered. And what we know is that when you're facing the kind of threat that Nigeria faces from groups that are linked to the Islamic State, to bandits that, as you rightly mentioned, now have the capacity to shoot down an aircraft, you need something, to be able to counter, these threats. For example, the A-29 is one of those, jets that can carry out attacks, it can launch missions at night, it can launch missions during the day. It's quite versatile. It can also be used for intelligence, for reconnaissance. It can also be used for backup, should there be an attack on Nigerian troops. It can also function as, some kind of patrolling the boundaries. I mean, I'm not talking about the borders of Nigeria. I'm talking about the boundaries, which are quite porous. So I think it's good news for the Nigerian army to have these jets being delivered at this point in time. Although I think it could have been delivered a lot more earlier. But again, it does require a lot of intelligence, because these equipments, again, as I mentioned earlier on, they don't just fly just like that. They need to have precise intelligence in order for them to carry out effective missions. And then you're dealing with asymmetric warfare here, which means there is a possibility of, casualties, when you use these jets, to launch missions. So again, it has to do with coordination, not just with the Nigerian Air Force, but the Nigerian Army, the DIA, the DSS, the National Intelligence Agencies. They've got to work hand in gloves to ensure that these aircraft are very effective. Now, you rightly mentioned that there is a scare that some of these aircraft could face enemy attack, as we've seen in previous occasions where Alpha jets, have been shot down by bandits around the Zamfara area, where the Beecroft King, 350 actually crashed, unfortunately, with the previous service chief, the Lieutenant General Atahiru, may his soul rest in peace. So we've seen, the capacity of terrorist organizations to shoot down these jets, but that has to be something which the Nigerian Air Force has to consider. But overall, As you saw with the collapse of the Islamic State, what made them collapse was the air capacity of the United States coalition forces. So well utilized, this A-29 Tucano aircraft could mean a game changer to the war against Boko Haram and bandits in the northwestern part of the country.
Understood. David, welcome to the show. Good morning to you. I mean, you've already put it out there. Steve has already asked you, but these things aren't cheap. they are quite pricey. Some $469 million spent, and then on top of that, on the same theme of training, we know that 200 Nigerian Air Force members are being currently trained in 9 different countries. First and foremost, how confident are you that Nigeria's arsenal is now stronger than that of the terrorists, especially since, as you've rightfully put it, it is known that they too have sophisticated weaponry, in their midst. And then further, looking at this from a somewhat political standpoint, we know that perhaps if we cast our minds back to the Goodluck Jonathan administration, that administration struggled to secure weapons from the United States. At that time, the reason given for that was because of Nigeria's human rights abuses.
That's right.
So the United States says, that has obviously changed in recent history with us obviously bringing in these jets into the country. But what do you think has prompted that change? So it's 2 things. First and foremost, how confident are you that Nigeria's arsenal will be stronger than that of the enemy it's facing? And then secondly, why do you think Nigeria has been able to develop its weaponry in this way, especially since current administrations had failed?
I think let me go with the again. It is very clear, without doubt, that the Nigerian arsenal is a lot more powerful than that of any insurgency, be it Boko Haram, the last Jazz faction of Abubakar Shekau, who is now dead, or the Islamic State of East Africa Province faction of Balawan or Abu Musab al-Banawi, whichever leader you want to attribute to it. Be it bandits in the northwest or so-called secessionist groups in the southern part of the country. The Nigerian army has a stronger arsenal than these forces. Now, what makes a difference is not how much equipment you have. Remember, we're talking about horizontal warfare here, asymmetric, whereby enemies are much more comfortable using guerrilla tactics. So it's difficult to really look at the number of weapons that you have as opposed to that of your enemy in order for you to determine how successful you are or you will be. So we're not talking about Nigeria here invading another country in a conventional warfare. That you can then be able to have a balance as to who has more weapons will mean success. So that has to be made very clear. No non-state group within Nigeria has the kind of weapons or equipment or expertise in terms of usage that the Nigerian army has. It's got the air superiority. It's got more, military, well-trained than any non-state group in the country. It's got the logistics. It's got the money, the resources, and also the backing of the international country behind it. So that has to be made very clear, that additional weapons of this nature, A-29 Tucano fighter jets, will make a difference. Again, the key here is if effectively used. The second question, which I want to talk about, is why are they getting these weapons now? Why not before? Now, this is all down to international politics and diplomacy. One of the key reasons why Nigeria has suffered or has struggled to acquire these weapons, especially from the United States, is because the Nigerian army has been accused of human rights abuses. It's been accused of, deliberately targeting civilian positions during, its missions. Now, these are all war casualties, and of course, the Nigerian army has accepted in certain cases that indeed it did what was not right, and that is why they have set up in my understanding, a human rights division to deal with these kind of airstrikes that were not precision-based airstrikes that were random, that we've seen some of them landing in IDP or internally displaced camps in the northern part of the country. So I think what has changed now is the fact that the Nigerian army is showing some engagement in terms of how it deals with its investigations when it comes to strikes that hit civilian positions. And again, it's also down to when you have the money, you can buy it. Most of these, the United States, for example, is also worried that if it doesn't sell these equipments to the Nigerian government, other countries will sell these equipments to the Nigerian government. So the Nigerian government has proven, holding its sovereignty very close to its chest, that it can easily move from one partner to another in order for it to secure its national integrity, security, and territorial integrity. So, countries like the United States do not want to alienate Nigeria completely. They may delay them in terms of when they get these weapons. But eventually, Nigeria is the giant of Africa, whether you like it or not, whether there is insecurity throughout the country or not, it still remains the giant of Africa, and it will play a very powerful role. And the US understands this, but delay is not denial.
Understood. David, we're going to take a very short break. Please do stay with us. We will be coming back to you. However, right now, we will be taking a very short break before we continue on with the rest of the morning show. Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. We're still joined by counter-terrorism and organised crime specialist David Otto. David, thank you very much for joining us and for staying with us. I know that in the earlier parts of our conversation, we were talking about the new aircraft that have been inducted into Nigeria's Air Force, and we were talking about whether or not that would strengthen the Nigerian Army's response in comparison to the level of weaponry the enemy has. And you did say that there's definitely a stronger arsenal on the Nigerian side, but obviously we can't be complacent and underestimate the abilities of the enemy that the Nigerian Air Force are fighting. When we look at these missiles, we've all acknowledged that it is a good thing for the country to be able to strengthen its fleet of weapons. But talking about that, again, recent history, distant history as well, dictates that there also has to be a level of maintenance that Nigeria has to make sure it attributes to these weapons. Are you confident that Nigeria is prepared to make sure the maintenance needed for these weapons, for these aircrafts to be able to be durable for a long time is in place?
Yes, that's a very good question. And one of the things which was made very clear, as I understand, getting information regarding the purchase of this Super Tucano A29 aircraft, is that it came with not just the training of the air forces or the airmen that would fly this aircraft, but it also came with maintenance. And that is why it's very expensive to actually have one of these. I mean, it cost in the region between 20 to 30 million each of these. You could get it cheaper, but it also depends on the how old or how new these aircrafts are. So it just depends on the on these futures. But again, it's very important. We have a very lackadaisical way in Africa in terms of how we maintain equipment, especially with the military, and this sometimes is an advantage that the enemy takes, but also it sometimes gives what we call a security on goal, in the sense that if the government or the military is unable, or the security services are unable to maintain this aircraft, then what happens is they will be liable to crashes, which can be devastating. We've seen a few of those very recently, very sadly or so. And what the Nigerian Army or the Nigerian Air Force, or indeed the Nigerian government doesn't want, is for maintenance to be taken very lightly, not just on the aircraft that they bind, but also on equipment. We've seen scenarios in the battlefield in the northern part where very expensive, AMRAC vehicles have been, they've crumbled in the face of battle. Some of them have not been able to take off simply because there hasn't been that proper and rigorous follow-up on maintenance culture. So I think servicing and maintenance is one of the key elements that was highly stressed during the process of purchasing this Super Tucano A29 aircraft. It has to be done. If not, then if anything happens to any of this, it's about 20 to 30 million down the drain, and nobody wants this to happen.
All right, David. The arrival of these new fighter jets, came on the heels of the announcement by the army regarding the surrendering of the 28 Boko Haram and ISWAP members to the troops in Borno State. And that came after denials by the army that there wasn't any secret release, etc. But of course, we know that even thousands of Boko Haram members, have been released to the Borno State government. Those that were regarded as cleared suspects. So I'd like to ask you: yes, we've got the new fighter jets, but then this endless cycle of people surrendering, being rehabilitated, being trained, being reintroduced into the system. How does this help the fight against insurgency, against the bandits? You can have all the equipment, all the fighter jets for all you care, but then on the other hand, you've got people on the inside who are giving out information. You made reference to intelligence the other time. We've read about even a aircraft or an helicopter belonging to the Nigerian state, taking food and water, etc., to bandits. At what point is this going to stop, and how does it hinder the fight against insecurity in the land?
Very good. Just by obtaining this aircraft doesn't mean that you'll be successful in your counterinsurgency operations. That has to be made very clear. And as you rightly mentioned, these aircraft, they won't even take off if there is no intelligence to give them some kind of precision coordinates and say, this is where the bandits are, this is the coordinate, this is the time in which they were spotted. So everything has to be synchronized between inter-service. So the military, again, as I mentioned earlier on, has to work hand in gloves with the intelligence agencies, and they in turn have to coordinate with the Air Force. Now, again, what your viewers, but also your listeners have to be able to understand is that when it comes to counterinsurgency, it's not just about the kinetic angle of it. So it's just one aspect. And this has to be emphasized and re-emphasized over and over again. People have to understand that the military doesn't win you a counterinsurgency war. I mean, if they don't understand that from a Nigerian perspective, look at, the United States presence in Afghanistan after 20 years. Of course, they went there to destabilize the Taliban regime, to take out Al-Qaeda. They succeeded in killing Osama bin Laden. They succeeded in destabilizing the structure of Al-Qaeda. But after 20 years, the US has withdrawn from Afghanistan, and Al-Qaeda is still there. It's coming back strong. The Taliban has taken about 2/3, and some estimates that 85% of the territory has fallen back to the Taliban. So what does that tell you? It tells you that a military strategy alone is not enough. If you invade a country, you bomb it, how do you occupy it? So I think what the Nigerian government is struggling with is not that it doesn't have the capacity in terms of kinetic to deal with Boko Haram, but what it's struggling with is that other aspect. Now, if you look at what we call the terror triangle, which talks about the reasons why people join, as part of that triangle, which is the motivation and the ideology, you've got to have an equal strategy to deal with that. Why are people joining, and how can you stop them? How can you prevent them from joining? It's not just allowing them to have weapons and then expecting the Nigerian army or the Nigerian police to kill them off. It doesn't work that way. So you've got to deal with the terror triangle effectively. And that's why each country, including Nigeria, has to have an effective counterterrorism strategy. I know they have the NACTEX, which is the Nigerian counterterrorism strategy, but again, it's not being implemented effectively. So you've got to develop your national threat estimates, your national intelligence estimates, and that tells you very clearly what aspect comes to the military, what aspect is involved in terms of the army and the role of the police. What is governance doing? What is the civil society organizations doing? Above all, what is the Nigerian population doing? Because, insurgency is a people-centric activity. The people must be involved. They've got to be able to have confidence. They have to trust the government. The government has to show them that they can be trusted. But in the case of Nigeria, with the amount of insecurity in the 6 geopolitical zones, it's very difficult to achieve that. So we don't just buy this aircraft, but we also have to buy the hearts and minds of the people. And that takes another dimension. So people surrendering, again, coming back to that, which you did mention, is one thing. I mean, we know that the Nigerian army said about 28 people surrendered in Bama local government area to the 151 task force battalion. But so many of these terrorists have been surrendering since the 19th of May, when there was an announcement that the Boko Haram Jazz faction leader, Abubakar Shekau, had committed suicide. And a lot of his fighters who refused to join the so-called Islamic State of West Africa province, are now running away, into Cameroon, as we saw information about 158 of them surrendering to in one location known as Mora, which is, bordering Nigeria and Cameroon. They're surrendering there. But what do you do with them? Do you just keep them in prisons without doing anything? So there are so many dimensions, Steve, that we've got to look at.
Absolutely, totally agree. I think one thing we can all agree on is that rehabilitation doesn't always work. Criminals do become recidivists, they do reoffend. So when we talk about this cycle, as Steve put it to you earlier, I mean, do you believe in it? Do you think that this cycle of rehabilitation works more than it doesn't work? Because I think that has to be the next level of it. While we accept that people are surrendering, are they surrendering because their ideology has changed, because they no longer believe in this Islamic push for a state or for dominance? If their ideology itself hasn't changed, how then can we make sure that the rehabilitation is successful?
Femi, you're right. I mean, there is a program that I developed. It's called Step In, Step Out. And that program looks effectively on why people join terrorist organizations and how they step out of it. So how they step in and how they step out. And very clearly, you would quickly realize that rehabilitation is just one aspect. It talks about rehabilitating people from psychological issues, rehabilitating them from physical issues. But then you've got reintegration, which is, okay, you've rehabilitated an individual. How do you then reintegrate them back into society? If that backfires, as we've seen in many cases with the Operation Safe Corridor, where terrorists are supposedly rehabilitated, and then there are issues with reintegration back into the communities. Why is that the case? Because a lot of communities become resilient towards people that have committed atrocities within their own state, and then there is nothing that has been done to elevate the livelihood of the people that are in the community. And what they see is that you're treating, these so-called terrorists and criminals in, with some kind of a soft glove. You're giving them more opportunities than you're giving people that, that haven't taken violence, as an option. So the issues of rehabilitation, reintegration are very key here. But what about, people talk about the de-radicalization, that you have to deconstruct somebody from an ideology. That hasn't worked effectively in any country, because one of the big problems with de-radicalizing terrorists has always been that you can't just de-radicalize somebody. You've got to give them an alternative narrative. So if you take out their belief in jihad, or their belief in some kind of a Salafist ideology, what other ideology are you giving them? So this has been the problem with the de-radicalization program within the Nigerian government. But so many countries are facing the same thing. What other narrative do you give them? First of all, there's been instances, Femi, I have to mention that, where the people who come as experts to de-radicalize these individuals, they will say to them, oh, so you want me to leave Islam and join Christianity or something like that. So it's an immediate challenge there. This is something which has been said, that it comes down to individual aspects.
David, it pains me to have to interrupt you there. It does sound as though you did come to the end of your point. It has been an enthralling discussion having you. Thank you for joining us on the morning show. That was, of course, David Otto, who's a counter-terrorism and organised crime specialist. Thank you for joining us.